human.
Let me give you one piece of advice. Be honest. He knows more than you can imagine.
Mind scientists, or the study of human behavior in relation to the mind, is the newest of all the arts. It's less than 100 years old. And it is by far the one that is most cloaked in secrecy. MK Ultra. MK Ultra. Project Paperclip. Mind control. CIA operation. MK Ultra was one program, a series of programs that came out of the CIA to experiment with different types of mind control, using drugs, using electroshock, using insulin shock, and other techniques. Mind control. CIA operation. MK Ultra.
We are not professing to tell you the complete story of these activities. We are professing to tell you the complete story that we know.
Right.
But these records that we've uncovered don't tell the story. They tell pieces of it.
This is a story that has been told in bits and pieces. This is an attempt to pull most of it together. We know we don't have the full story. We do, however, have some striking new revelations and insights. The story begins here, just off the nation's front yard, the Mall. The buildings behind me were the headquarters for the World War II Office of Strategic Services. It was here that the first halting steps toward mind control began. The shaper and molder of OSS was General Wild Bill Donovan. He said of his group's work, "We may have made mistakes, but we were not afraid to try things that were never done before." In this anything-goes atmosphere, Donovan appointed this man, Stanley Lovell, a Boston industrialist, to break new ground in many scientific and technical fields. Donovan called Lovell his Dr. Moriarty, after the fiendish professor in Sherlock Holmes. Lovell liked the name and posed for this Saturday Evening Post photo. He later wrote of his OSS job that it was, quote, to stimulate the PEC's bad boy beneath the surface of every American scientist and to say to him, throw all of your normal law-abiding concepts out of the window. Here's a chance to raise merry hell. It was in this atmosphere that the search for mind control began. This bizarre man would be an active participant in that search over the next 2 decades. His name is George White, an OSS captain who had formerly been with the Bureau of Narcotics. In his diary, seen here publicly for the first time, White left a legacy of the darker side of American intelligence work. He received his early OSS training at the British-run school at Oshawa, Canada, the same school where Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond, was trained. White referred to the school in his diaries as the Oshawa School of Mayhem and Murder. Mike Burke, former OSS colleague of White's and now president of Madison Square Garden Center.
Very compelling fella, mysterious fella, almost mystical fella. He was fascinating because you knew something about him, but not enough about him to really get a fix on him. He also knew a great deal about the swifter elements of society, the gamier side of life, and he was very impressive in his technical knowledge of the underworld, so to speak.
He said, one of our men gets beat up. He says, you have to act real fast and teach these guys a lesson.
Charles Siragusa, a former narcotics officer and friend of White's.
He'll come around, he says, and break your kneecaps. And with that, one guy laughed, and George White always had a little Billy with him. And this one guy sort of naked. George White turned around and whapped him across the neck with it. Then he picked up a pool stick and started beating everybody up.
He made his point.
And he made his point.
George White was not a man of understatement or subtleties. His boss at OSS, Stanley Lovell, referred to him as deadly and dedicated. In this note from White's diaries, it says, call Lovell regarding TD. TD was a rather transparent cover for Truth Drug. George White worked with the Truth Drug Committee here at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in the nation's capital. They experimented with mescaline, scopolamine, and marijuana on unwitting victims. The committee soon learned there was no easy panacea, no truth drug at this stage. But White and later colleagues would not stop trying. The goal remained the same. As this 1952 CIA memo says, the aim is controlling an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will, and even against such fundamental laws of nature as self-preservation. But at one point, intelligence information received from Switzerland said that Sandoz Laboratories was about to put 100 million doses of LSD on the open market. And it caused enough concern within the agency that the United States was prepared to buy the entire supply. However, a slight mistake had been made. The mistake is made public for the first time.
I just found out on a new CIA document that there were no such large quantities of LSD on the market.
John Marks has filed numerous Freedom of Information suits against the CIA and has unearthed much new material. He is the author of The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, a history of intelligence agency work with mind control. He is a consultant for this report.
What happened is that there was a military attaché in Switzerland, an American officer, who got milligrams and kilograms mixed up. In other words, he made a mistake of thinking 1/1000th of a gram was the same as 1,000 grams, which is a mistake of 1,000,000 times. So when the CIA got the intelligence that there were 100 million doses on the market, in fact, there were 100 doses.
The man who would oversee the CIA's research into drugs and most of the agency's behavior programs is this man, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist. Dr. Gottlieb declined ABC News' request for an interview. In their never-ending search for the miracle weapon, CIA operatives searched here in the remote mountain areas of southern Mexico for what up to then had been considered a myth, magic mushrooms. They used this man, a part-time chemist with the CIA, to dupe this man, a vice president of a bank and an amateur mycologist or mushroom expert, to try to get to the magic mushrooms and turn them into a drug. Word of Wasson's discovery reached the CIA quickly. Dr. James Moore, a University of Delaware chemist, secretly served the CIA preparing deadly chemicals on short notice. Moore was instructed to get close to Wasson and accompany him on another trip to Mexico to get the magic mushrooms. Internal documents show the CIA felt a drug derived from the mushrooms could remain an agency secret. What in the world were they looking for with the magic mushrooms?
I think the best answer to that is that they were looking for fundamental information on compounds that would be capable of causing changes in behavior, changes in mental attitude.
Did you ever consider what would have happened if any of these substances were given to, say, unwitting people?
Oh, I don't remember having considered that specifically.
What if you... I trust perhaps you've thought about it.
Well, I haven't worried about it. Your question again, what would I have thought had I known that
any of these substances would
have been given to
unwitting persons?
You mean a hostile agent of another government?
No,
I think that was probably one of the things they had in mind.
I mean testing it out on an American citizen.
I guess I must seem very, very cold-blooded about this, but I don't recall ever having been very much preoccupied with that issue.
Unwitting Americans. As one CIA document says, such testing would be operationally realistic. A former CIA official who worked on these programs describes for the first time how the decision was made. He did not wish to be filmed or recorded. Thus his remarks are read by someone else.
I think every last one of us felt sorry to attempt this kind of thing. We knew we were crossing the line. Every decent kid knows he shouldn't steal, but he does it sometimes. We knew damn well we didn't want anyone else to know what we were doing.
The decision was made to do testing on unwitting victims. It was decided they should be on the fringes of society because they were most vulnerable.
It was the borderline underworld, prostitutes, drug addicts, and other small-timers who would be powerless to seek any kind of revenge in case they found out.
And as their predecessors had a decade earlier, the CIA turned to George White for help. White was now a high-ranking narcotics official, and by this time, the stories about George White were legendary told. A former CIA official who worked in the safe houses reveals that they were used not only for drug testing, but to study sexual behavior and how it could be used to manipulate people.
We did quite a study of prostitutes and their behavior. How do you take a woman who is willing to use her body to get money out of a guy to get him to talk about things which are much more important, like state secrets? We learned a lot about human nature in the bedroom. We started to pick up knowledge that could be used in operations.
There would be victims in all of this, but as the agency knew, they couldn't fight back. Some entries from George White's diaries. Clarice gets horrors. Janet, sky high. As one agency memo says, we have no answer to the moral question. The safe houses were not the only testing grounds. Millions of dollars would be spent on LSD research at universities throughout the country. And word would be... Covering a span of history such as we are in this report, one can get sidetracked by the so-called glamour and mystery of espionage work or by the exotic qualities of some drugs. But what you can't lose sight of is what all of this would mean in terms of individual human beings. There would be deaths, there would be long-lasting and harmful effects. Lyman Kirkpatrick was Inspector General of the CIA at the time of Frank Olson's death. But had not the Olson case occurred within the secret confines of the CIA, would not this case have been a prosecutable case? Perhaps manslaughter?
I would think very definitely prosecutable, and certainly from the point of view of the of Mr. Olson, why it should probably have been actionable.
Frank Olson's suicide slowed down the CIA's testing of LSD and other drugs, but only momentarily. The CIA was not the only government agency interested in the possibilities LSD and other drugs presented for mind control. The Army Chemical Corps first started working with the CIA and then branched off on its own. It too tested drugs on unwitting victims, and a death would result. The case of this man, Harold Blower, a tennis pro, seen here with his daughter Elizabeth, is well known. In 1953, Blower was a private patient at the New York State Psychiatric Institute. He was given 5 injections of a mescaline derivative that was being tested secretly for the Army Chemical Corps. With the 5th injection, Harold Blower died. As with the Olson case, a 22-year cover-up followed, until finally the Army admitted the real details of Blower's death. Since the initial news stories of Harold Blower's death, close to 5,000 documents, previously classified, have been released by the Army and obtained by ABC News. They provide valuable insight into Army activities at the time of Blower's death and where the Army went from there with their own drug testing program. From a previously classified deposition of Dr. James Cattell, who administered the mescaline derivative, on the purpose of the drug testing, to produce symptoms similar to those that you see in schizophrenia, on how much the patient knew about all this. We didn't delineate all the possibilities of what might happen because then you contaminate your experiment. Cattell then relates that he never even knew what drug he had given Harold Blower because of the secrecy of the Army experiments. We didn't know whether it was dog piss. This was secret. This was a secret. We weren't in on it. We asked Blower's daughter Elizabeth for her reaction. Other Army experiments continued on mental patients around the country. Work done at the Tulane Medical Center in New Orleans involved several drugs, hallucinogenics, and electrodes implanted in the brain. The chief researcher was Dr. Russell Monroe, now head of the psychiatry department at the University of Maryland. These are various progress reports written by Dr. Monroe and recently obtained by ABC News. From one of the progress reports, a report of a woman who had electrodes implanted in the brain and was then given LSD and other drugs. She became agitated, cried, lapsed into a trance-like state. Felt as if she were about to have a convulsion, experienced waves of darkness and light, had bizarre sensations in her neck and legs, said somebody was trying to manipulate her body. At this point, Dr. Monroe wrote that the woman was obviously having paranoid ideas. As a layperson, perhaps you can enlighten me. What therapeutic effect would the type of experiment that I just described have on a patient?
Well, the therapeutic effect would be indirect.
Was this patient aware that she was being given LSD?
Yes, I mean, they were told that they would be given some medication, and they should have...
Specifically LSD?
Well, we told them, I don't think that they would have even known what LSD was then at the time. They were told that they were going to they would be given some medications which might make them feel worse.
Thornwell, as reported on ABC last January, was an Army private stationed in Orléans, France. Classified documents were missing from his unit. Thornwell became a suspect. His 2.5-month interrogation included administration of sodium pentothal, hypnosis, isolation, and deprivation of sleep. Army documents obtained by ABC News refer to this interrogation as conventional. Despite the severe questioning, Army intelligence was getting nowhere with Thornwell, and it was decided to slip him LSD. For 16 years, Thornwell never knew what had hit him.
Tell me about the acid.
I'd rather not. It's a bad trip. It's a bad trip. That was a bad trip.
The pain was so excruciating. Felt like somebody was sticking me with 1,000,000 pins. You know, just everywhere. Oh, it just...
From the Army's point of view, this type of LSD interrogation was a success. Other documents refer to the exploitability of interrogation subjects, cracking them, keeping them off balance mentally, and providing an economical, speedy, and productive aid to interrogation. From James Thornwell's point of view, it was no success. Thornwell still has serious problems. He's run through 2 marriages, he maintains he can't hold a job, can't concentrate, has nightmares, and feels socially and emotionally isolated. Last fall, Thornwell filed suit against the government in federal court. In a moment, we will examine the closest experimentation to brainwashing that we have uncovered. By far, the most chilling experiments we have uncovered took place at this Gothic estate called Ravenscrag, halfway up Mount Royal in Montreal. It houses the Allen Memorial Institute of Psychiatry of McGill University. It was here that the CIA funded a series of experiments, severe experiments. The work was done by the Institute's then director, Dr. Ewan Cameron. It is the closest experimentation to brainwashing yet disclosed. His work, unprecedented in psychiatry, consisted of 3 areas which he called sleep therapy, psychic driving, and the ultimate, depatterning. Dr. Maurice Dongier, current head of the Allen Memorial Institute.
In his psychic driving, so-called type of therapy, he would give the patient intensive electric treatment in order to make the patient regress deeply, become forgetful, and then he would attempt to implant new ideas in the mind of the patient.
Now, to a layman, it would appear that Dr. Cameron was trying to take the slate and wipe it clean, the slate being the mind. In other words, brainwashing.
Exactly, that's a very good comparison.
Brainwashing.
Yes. I don't think that when you look at that in retrospect, the hopes that he had have been in any way fulfilled.
But Cameron would plunge on. The next step was what he called psychic driving. This involved almost endless tape-recorded messages and more drugs for the patient. Cameron wrote that this was the way to make direct controlled changes in personality.
I thought this was the coldest and most impersonal treatment that anybody could give to anybody in the world. And I became more and more despondent and more angry. I just became so despondent that I thought I can't live like this any longer. And I thought I would just go out and throw myself underneath the cars on McGregor. I stood on the curb of that street and I stood there and I thought, okay, go. And then I thought, what if you're not killed? What if you're just maimed? What if you don't die and you live and you can't even talk anymore? And I couldn't do it.
The most severe technique Cameron used was depatterning. He described it as breaking up the existing patterns of behavior by means of intensive electroshock therapy with prolonged periods of sleep. He carried out these experiments in something he called the sleep rooms.
People in there were like babies. They cried and they were very disoriented. And we were very afraid of the sleep room. We used to walk very carefully against the side of the corridor that was opposite the sleep room with our backs to the wall when we'd go by.
Cameron used this combined sleep electroshock treatment on patients as long as 30 days. One patient he kept asleep for 65 days. Cameron retired, and his successor, Dr. Robert Cleghorn, ordered a follow-up study on the patients treated with Cameron's depatterning method.
It showed that it was no more beneficial in its result than the use of more conservative methods.
But the follow-up study showed that 60% of those who had been depatterned still had amnesia for periods of anywhere from 6 months to 10 years. That's quite a memory loss, isn't it?
That is a memory loss. Indeed it is. It's I think, more than desirable.
In retrospect, does Dr. Cameron's experimentation and his treatment appear harsh?
I would say yes. I mean, this forceful type of approach that I was describing to you is definitely, it can be said that it's harsh.
I wouldn't call it harsh. I would say it was harder on the staff than it was on the patients, because
I just, I just can't, sometimes I can't believe it, and yet I know it's true.
If you had the opportunity to say something to the people at the Central Intelligence Agency who financed this study, what would you say?
I realize the CIA is a very important organization and they have a very important job to do. But God, it surely doesn't have to be done on people who are totally incapable of knowing what's happening or having any defense against it. And I can't imagine the mentality of people who would do this.
It was the Cold War, and especially the trial of Joseph Cardinal Mindszenty, who was forced to testify in a Hungarian court that he was a spy. And then later, the Korean War, were the coerced and mainly fraudulent confessions of American servicemen.
My germination took place on the...
That would spark intense interest in intelligence circles about brainwashing. The CIA secretly commissioned a study of communist brainwashing methods at the Cornell University Medical Center. A leader of that study was Dr. Lawrence Hinkle. He explains first the Russian method of controlling and breaking a person.
Absolutely isolated from everyone else, with one man whose job it is to get you to write the extent to which you are a criminal. In this setting, you can get people to do most anything, do you see? Because you don't have to lay a hand on them. And by the time you get through and you go up before the judge, the fellow says, were you a spy? He says, yes, I was a spy.
It was the Cold War, and especially the trial of Joseph Cardinal Mindszenty, who was forced to testify in a Hungarian court that he was a spy. And then later, the Korean War, were the coerced and mainly fraudulent confessions of American servicemen.
My germination took place on the...
That would spark intense interest in intelligence circles about brainwashing. The CIA secretly commissioned a study of communist brainwashing methods at the Cornell University Medical Center. A leader of that study was Dr. Lawrence Hinkle. He explains first the Russian method of controlling and breaking a person.
Absolutely isolated from everyone else, with one man whose job it is to get you to write the extent to which you are a criminal. In this setting, you can get people to do most anything, do you see? Because you don't have to lay a hand on them. And by the time you get through and you go up before the judge, the fellow says, were you a spy? He says, yes, I was a spy.
It was the Cold War, and especially the trial of Joseph Cardinal Mindszenty, who was forced to testify in a Hungarian court that he was a spy. And then later, the Korean War, were the coerced and mainly fraudulent confessions of American servicemen.
My germination took place on the...
That would spark intense interest in intelligence circles about brainwashing. The CIA secretly commissioned a study of communist brainwashing methods at the Cornell University Medical Center. A leader of that study was Dr. Lawrence Hinkle. He explains first the Russian method of controlling and breaking a person.
Absolutely isolated from everyone else, with one man whose job it is to get you to write the extent to which you are a criminal. In this setting, you can get people to do most anything, do you see? Because you don't have to lay a hand on them. And by the time you get through and you go up before the judge, the fellow says, were you a spy? He says, yes, I was a spy. We're not able to do this nor interested in it.
They were, though.
Some of the low-level people were, but the high-level people were not, to tell you the truth.
But documents clearly show that the CIA was attempting to develop agents over whom they had as much control as possible. Agents who would perform tasks contrary to their own good.
Normally conditioned American who's been trained to kill and then to have no memory of having killed. His brain has not only been washed, as they say, it has been dry cleaned.
We're not able to do this nor interested in it.
They were, though.
Some of the low-level people were, but the high-level people were not, to tell you the truth.
But documents clearly show that the CIA was attempting to develop agents over whom they had as much control as possible. Agents who would perform tasks contrary to their own good.
Normally conditioned American who's been trained to kill and then to have no memory of having killed. His brain has not only been washed, as they say, it has been dry cleaned.
We're not able to do this nor interested in it.
They were, though.
Some of the low-level people were, but the high-level people were not, to tell you the truth.
But documents clearly show that the CIA was attempting to develop agents over whom they had as much control as possible. Agents who would perform tasks contrary to their own good.
Normally conditioned American He's been trained to kill and then to have no memory of having killed. His brain has not only been washed, as they say, it has been dry cleaned.
And administering the procedures. You're asking whether an individual can be, under hypnosis, influenced, coerced, persuaded, shaped to perform an antisocial act, or a destructive act, or an act of violence. My answer would be yes, and administering the procedures. You're asking whether an individual can be, under hypnosis, influenced, coerced, persuaded, shaped to perform an antisocial act, or a destructive act, or an act of violence. My answer would be yes, and administering the procedures. You're asking whether an individual can be, under hypnosis, influenced, coerced, persuaded, shaped to perform an antisocial act, or a destructive act, or an act of violence. My answer would be yes.
In the only feasible way. I'm not in any way saying that hypnosis doesn't take place. I'm not saying there's nothing to it.
I would say that most government agencies concerned with intelligence operations have been looking to hypnosis as a tool for a variety of purposes, one of which is to carry out and to execute certain intelligence operations on a basis where they would not have to rely completely on some of their own emotional reactions. Actually,
would that entail murder?
It could, if you consider that an act of killing someone under circumstances of war is murder. I think one has to define what that means.
Under circumstances of peace.
Under circumstances of peace, it would be murder.
Another former CIA agent says that Fidel Castro at one time was considered as a possible target for a Manchurian candidate.
Castro was naturally our discussion point. Could you get somebody gung-ho enough that they would go in and get him? But if you have 100% control of a guy, you have 100% dependency. If something happens and you haven't programmed it in, you've got a problem.
So in the end, it was decided that a Manchurian candidate was not feasible. But the search for mind control continued. But could the mind be controlled? Perhaps not. But is human behavior predictable? In this area, the CIA did make a significant breakthrough. A personality assessment system designed by the agency's chief psychologist, John Gittinger. It comes close to being able to predict how humans will behave.
It's really a descriptive system, an attempt to try to describe personality in a relatively systematic way so that hopefully you can get some kind of an idea to predict what the behavior between different kinds of individuals.
Gittinger. In this area, the CIA did make a significant breakthrough. A personality assessment system designed by the agency's chief psychologist, John Gittinger. It comes close to being able to predict how humans will behave.
It's really a descriptive system, an attempt to try to describe personality in a relatively systematic way so that hopefully you can get some kind of an idea to predict what the behavior between different kinds of individuals.
Gittinger. In this area, the CIA did make a significant breakthrough. A personality assessment system designed by the agency's chief psychologist, John Gittinger. It comes close to being able to predict how humans will behave.
It's really a descriptive system, an attempt to try to describe personality in a relatively systematic way so that hopefully you can get some kind of an idea to predict what the behavior between different kinds of individuals.
Gittinger. According to one of them, they agreed amongst themselves to keep the inquiry within bounds that would satisfy the committee. Former narcotics officer Charles Siragusa says that he was asked to limit his testimony by the man he reported to at the CIA.
He wanted me not to say anything.
To perjure yourself.
That's right. Well, either that, I'd have to perjure myself or take the Fifth Amendment. And I'm not about to take the Fifth Amendment for anybody.
Okay. Former CIA chemist Robert Lashbrook testified he had no first-hand knowledge of the agency-run safe houses when, in fact, he supervised one of them. And according to George White's diaries, was at a safe house when White conducted what he called an LSD surprise experiment. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, whom we recently filmed near his California home, oversaw many of the CIA behavioral programs. He retired in 1973 and destroyed the records of this work.
This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the... Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
MK Ultra was the secret CIA crash program to develop techniques to control the human mind. By the end of the Korean War, 70% of the 7,000 U.S. prisoners of war had signed confessions, 15% cooperated fully, and only 5% steadfastly refused confession or indoctrination. Professors Wolf and Hinkle submitted a secret report to Director of Central Intelligence Alan Dulles about communist methods of brainwashing that was the definitive work on the subject in 1953. It stated that no drugs or machines were used. Intense psychological pressure and human weakness were the key, beginning with solitary confinement. Guards constantly reminded the prisoner that he was totally cut off from outside support, ordered him to stand for long periods, dictated the positions allowed for sleep, waking him if he moved while sleeping, banned all outside stimuli such as books, conversation, or news of the outside world. After 4 to 6 weeks, the prisoner would break down. Quote, "He weeps, he mutters, and prays aloud in his cell." At this stage, the interrogation began in a special room. The guard told him that he knew his own crimes all too well. The prisoner is in the position of trying to prove his innocence to he knew not what. The interrogator and the prisoner bond in their shared ransacking of the captive's soul. As the interrogation proceeded, the prisoner realized that he could only end his ordeal with a full confession. Quote, "The prisoner feels that something must be done to end this. He must find a way out." According to a KGB man, more than 99% of prisoners signed a confession at this stage. Then the subject was either shot or sent to a labor camp after sentencing. Chinese techniques would move on to re-education of prisoners by moving them into a group cell for political indoctrination, incessant study of Marx and Mao. Lectures and self-criticism led to political conversion by group pressure. Prisoners demonstrated their commitment by ferociously attacking any deviations. Constant intimacy with prisoners who reviled him for his resistance pushed the prisoner beyond his emotional endurance. As the prisoner conformed, his cellmates gave increased acceptance and esteem, which reinforced his commitment to the party, for he learned that only his acceptance allowed him to live successfully in the cell. In contrast, the American mind control effort was a mini Manhattan Project, with the conviction that the keys to brainwashing lay in technology. The agency's brainwashing experts gravitated to people in the mold of the brilliant and sometimes mad scientists, obsessed by the wonders of the brain. In 1953, CIA officer Richard Helms chose Dr. Sidney Gottlieb to run the technical service staff. The TSS, through the Office of Research and Development, was given the job of developing poisons to assassinate political opponents, truth serum drugs for interrogating spies, and hypnotic techniques to create unwitting double agents, couriers, and robot assassins. Dr. Gottlieb used Nazi scientists and their state-of-the-art mind control techniques that had been perfected in concentration camps using victims of the Holocaust. General Dwight D. Eisenhower gave his personal approval to exploit the work and research of the Nazis in the death camps. The German doctors were brought to the U.S. and went to work for Project Paperclip. These men were insulated against war crimes charges. The Nuremberg prosecutors were shocked that the U.S. authorities were using German doctors despite their criminal past. Under the leadership of Dr. Strughold, 34 scientists accepted contracts from Project Paperclip and were moved to Randolph Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. These personalities began to work on human radiation studies, aviation medicine, microwave technology, and MK-Ultra mind control experiments. The authorization to hire these Nazi scientists came directly from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The top military brass stated that they wished to exploit these rare minds. Operation Paperclip eventually recruited 9,000 Nazi scientists and technicians to help the U.S. destroy the USSR. Some of these scientists were known as programmers, people skilled in the art of breaking down and controlling the human mind.
And unless and until you are prepared to look at the whole truth, wherever it may go, whoever it may lead to, The more you educate yourself, the more you understand where things come from, the more obvious things become, and you begin to see lies everywhere. You have to know the truth and seek the truth, and the truth will set you free.
Yes, I was used in CIA black budget operations, many of them of a military nature. I was a mind control victim in these same black budget operations, and I was used as a propagandist by the CIA to help bring in the New World Order. I was actually a media person, I still am, radio and TV and print journalism, and basically they set me up through a CIA front company to propagate the New World Order through New Age propaganda.
One of the things people are going to be most interested in trying to understand who you are and what you're thinking is there came some point in time when you crossed this line of thinking about being a whistleblower to making the choice to actually become a whistleblower. Walk people through that decision-making process.
Perspective of the brains, cause if you knew that this was really true, you would get sick to your stomach and then you probably puke. But when it's all said and done and this is over, they'll remember that I said it, the whistleblower. As a child I was academically gifted, excelled in math and physics, spelling, track and fitness. Felt the wrath of intelligence at age 2. I changed too. Why? Dark glasses. He told me, Dane, one day that you'll be an asset to the planet Earth and survival of its race. But something irked me by the smile on his face. He said he would be back and that he had my files saved. This ain't no bullshit, this ain't no X-Files, mate. Read my bio page, like a bioplay. This is the final stage. For its earthlings and beyond 2012 is when your consciousness expands, your outer shell. Ain't no time to waste, pop the locks off the safe. I'm on the run from the feds, like I caught a case. Cause the secrets I know are knowledge that I've gained, the type of knowledge that would change perspective of the brains. Cause if you knew that this was really true, you would get sick to your stomach and then you probably puke. But when it's all said and done and this is over, they'll remember that I said it, the whistleblower.
I've been under very severe harassment pretty much for the past 4 years, since 1994. And interestingly enough, 1994 was the time at which I started to speak out, not publicly even, but just to tell people some of the things that I'd been involved in.
What did you start saying?
About what?
In 1994, what did you start saying that created...
Okay. Well, it was something, I think, about breaking my programming also. But when I broke my programming, which means I started to remember that I had been programmed, that I was leading a double life, in essence, for a number of years, many years. It's when you break your programming, it's very difficult. But when you break your programming, they'll do whatever they have to do in order to make sure that they re-recruit you, or they can stop that from happening. So if they can't stop you from remembering, they hope that they can stop you from speaking. All right? From remembering, they hope that they can stop you from speaking. All right?
Fabian! Over here? You've been on tour.
I'm confused because I feel like I've been missing out.
Missing out on what?
On life.
I really don't think that that's the truth.
This is what I have to talk about.
Okay.
I feel like I've been missing out on life.
Like what part of life?
Life, like things going on. Like I feel like I'm behind or something. I know that sounds so weird, but
The greatest form of control is where you think you're free when you're being fundamentally manipulated and dictated. One form of dictatorship is being in a prison cell and you can see the bars and touch it. The other one is sitting in a prison cell but you can't see the bar, you think you're free. What do you...
You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad. Do you want to know what it is? The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work. Into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your
human race is suffering from is mass hypnosis. We are being hypnotized by people like this. Newsreaders, politicians, teachers, lecturers. We are in a country and in a world that is being run by unbelievably sick people. The chasm between what we're told is going on and what is really going on is absolutely enormous.
So in the future, I'm going to be doing different videos on each individual type of mind control. Now, today I'm just going to be going over an overview of the different types, and I'm going to be giving you examples of each type so you can be aware of the different types of mind control. Now, if you may want to subscribe because I'm going to be doing a whole series on the different types of mind control, and you might be interested. So there's 3 basic levels of mind control. Now, each level corresponds with a different school of psychology. So the first level appeals to consciousness, the second level appeals to unconsciousness, and the third level appeals to biology. So in terms of schools of psychology, the first one, consciousness, has to do with and corresponds with cognitive psychology. Cognitive means aware. You're aware of what's going on. The second one is unconsciousness. That corresponds with behavioral psychology. Third one is biological psychology. That would also be psychiatry. Now, this is when you try to control the mind through physical means such as drugs and electroshock. Every mind control technique fits somewhere in this chart. Some mind control techniques will fit squarely at one of these levels. Other mind control techniques will maybe fit in between 2. But every mind control technique fits in some part of this chart. So let's look at the different levels of mind control and what fits in between. The first level we're going to look at is the conscious level or the cognitive level. This level deals with information. It never deals with punishment, duress, or physical pain. And it appeals to a person's reason. So the 2 basic forms of this would be education and ideological indoctrination. So a good example of education is when you get your driver's license. You take certain classes, you learn the rules of the road, and the intention is to make you behave a certain way when you drive. Now, most people wouldn't have a problem with that, because if people didn't behave a certain way when they drive, then we'd have a problem. So ideological indoctrination. What do I mean by that? Well, ideological means worldview, your philosophy, and indoctrination means what you're educated in. So what are you educated in your worldview? So this would include your political education, your religious education, and even your science education. Now what we mean is, how do you view the world by what you were educated? So at this level, we also have to mention propaganda. Now the word propaganda means information, but because propaganda has been abused in the past, people have a negative viewpoint of it. Now the basic idea is someone wants you to view the world in a certain way, so they educate you to do so. So I'll be doing some more videos on propaganda and I'll get more into it, but all propaganda is information control. Now, it's actually not always bad. I'm going to give you a couple examples. Have you ever seen those billboards that say 50,000 people a year die in drunk driving accidents? Now, that's propaganda. Is it bad? I don't think so. Now, here's another example. Hitler. Hitler used propaganda to educate the German populace into the idea that all Germany's problems were because of the Jews. Is that bad? Yeah. So let's look at the next level. Unconscious, or behavioral psychology. This does not appeal to the conscious. This is an attempt to control a person without their conscious decision being involved at all. So the biggest school of psychology in this level is behavioral psychology, which comes from Pavlovian psychology. You know the guy Pavlov, he had the dog and he'd ring the bell and the dog would salivate? Well, this deals with stimulus response. Now, stimulus response. Stimulus, something happens. You ring the bell. And response, the dog salivates. Now, this does not appeal to the conscious. The dog does not decide to salivate. He just does. It's an automatic response. Now, unlike the conscious level, this level often includes physical pain, punishment, and duress. So you may have seen some of my videos about the MK Ultra program. Now, this program deals in this unconscious level. It's an attempt to implant a stimulus response mechanism. So for example, you would implant a command in a person so that when they hear a key word, which would be the stimulus, they would go and kill someone, which would be the response. It's a stimulus response. Now again, the person that is programmed to kill doesn't decide to do it because it's an automatic response. And in fact, he doesn't even know he's programmed because it's in his subconscious. At this level, we have hypnotism. And the reason that is because hypnotism is implanting commands into the subconscious. Now, for example, you have the operator that says, when I say bubblegum, you are going to bark like a dog. So you have the stimulus, bubblegum, you have the response, barking like a dog. Or the operator says, when I snap my fingers, you're gonna act like a stripper. So snapping my fingers is the stimulus and acting like a stripper is the response. Creating a stimulus response mechanism is called conditioning. Now, part of conditioning is programming a person to associate pain or pleasure with a certain thing. Now, another part of this level is punishment. Now, punishment is an attempt to get someone to associate pain with an undesirable behavior. So here's an example. Say you have a kid, and your kid flips the teacher off. Now, in the cognitive level, you would sit your child down and you would explain to him why that's wrong. And hopefully your child would make the decision not to do it again. Now, in this unconscious level, the behaviorist level, you would beat the hell out of your kid until he associates pain with flipping the teacher off, and hopefully he doesn't do it again. I have a personal pet peeve with behaviorism because it's an attempt to control someone's behavior like you would train a dog using rewards and punishment. Now, I personally like the cognitive approach. So at this level, we also have brainwashing, or what the CIA likes to call interrogation. And you would do this by using physical pain and duress to control someone. So another note about brainwashing is that it has the word washing. Now, washing means to wipe something away, to wash it away, right? Now, the word brainwashing comes from a technique they used in China, also called political re-education. Now, the idea is that you wash something away and you put something else in its place. Now, in the MK Ultra program, psychiatrist Ian Cameron would call it de-patterning. Another form of this is when you take someone from their religion and you use mind control techniques to wipe out their religious beliefs, and then you put another belief in its place. Now, this is called deprogramming. So under brainwashing, we have political re-education, we have depatterning, or we have religious re-education, or deprogramming. Now, the last level, we have biology. Now, this equates to biological psychology or psychiatry. Now, what you're doing at this level is you're attempting to control behavior through physical interventions. Physical interventions include drugs, brain surgery, electroshock, or implanting something into the brain. Now, remember the example I gave you with the child who flipped the teacher off. Now, the cognitive approach would be to sit the child down and to explain to him why it's wrong. The behaviorist approach would be to spank him, and the biological approach would be to label him with oppositional defiant disorder and give him a psychotropic drug. So I'm not going to get into this biological approach because I'm going to do a video later, and this video is going to include a program that, it's a mind control program that would actually implant microchips and electrodes into someone's brain so they can be controlled like a remote control car or a remote control robot. Now, those are 3 basic levels. Now, there are all sorts of different mind control techniques that fit in between these levels as well. Now, in between the conscious and the unconscious level, there's different techniques to control someone's behavior through emotions. And we're being subjected to this constantly on a daily basis. Now, one of these techniques is public relations, and this is aimed to make you feel a certain way about something. Now, public relations isn't always aimed to make you feel good about something. It can also make you feel bad about a competitor or a group or a person. Now, this is called black public relations, and I'm also going to do a video on this later. Now, another mind control technique is marketing and advertisement, and I'll be doing a video about this later, but there's a reason why you have the half-naked girl holding the can of beer. So another mind control technique that would fall in between the conscious and the unconscious would be what I like to call pandering. And the word pandering means to fulfill an immoral desire. So you have a prostitute who panders to a sexual desire, and you have a drug dealer who panders to an addiction. So I'm using this word lightly, but basically what I mean is you're controlling someone by giving someone what they want. Now, under pandering, I'm including social control by distraction, and that includes television, porno, video games. So another technique I want to mention at the biological level is drug addiction. Pimps keep their whores in line by making them addicted to drugs. And beyond that, there's a reason why they add caffeine in our soft drinks, there's a reason why they add MSG into our fast food, and there's a reason why they add sugar in almost anything you buy at the grocery store. It's a type of mind control. So the last technique I want to mention is at the very bottom, and it's when you give up on trying to control their mind and you actually restrain them. So some examples of this are straitjackets, institutionalization, imprisonment, and heavy tranquilizers. Now, if all else fails, you can't control their mind, you can't restrain them, there's still the final solution. You can shoot them.
This is Weekend Edition from NPR News. I'm Linda Wertheimer. Coming up, advertising when times are tough. But first, the FBI has an entire army of people whose only job is to do surveillance. Whether tracking a terrorist suspect or mobster or potential spy, NPR's Dina Temple-Raston found out that the secret is all about blending in.
Surveillance in cop shows is generally pretty straightforward. There are always a couple of guys in a van and maybe another two in a car outside some apartment building. But real surveillance is much more subtle. The agent in charge of the Special Operations Division of the FBI in New York changed since the Cold War. Now their surveillance requires more political savvy, more finesse.
Every day you just need to get a little piece of the puzzle. You don't have to get the puzzle all in one day. Everything builds up to a very long story, if you will, like a soap opera more so, as opposed to just a cut and dry short story. And you build on it every single day.
And because it is a drip, drip, drip information operation, the SSGs end up learning a lot about the people they are following. Before Charlie Muldoon was supervising the SSGs in New York, he was doing surveillance on mobster John Gotti. He said he could read him like a book.
And you could just tell, after following him for a long time, all right, you can just tell, you could tell by his body language and how other people related to him whether he was in the middle of a crisis.
That's an important piece of information.
When he used to get mad, he used to talk a lot more with his hands. And he used to be very, 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 very physical with his hands.
I was determined to keep an eye on Papa, Bravo, and
I know you're out there. I know you're out there. I can feel you now. I don't know the future. I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it's going to begin. I'm going to hang up this phone, and then I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see. I'm going